So we start the recording, AI companion. Yes, I think we are all set. Okay, we are set now. So welcome to this 211th edition of Thursday Musings. Today we'll be talking about a very, very important topic, decoding dyslexias. So what we have done is we have everyone on the mute mode. The panelists will be able to unmute themselves. The questions are invited in the chat box. The session is being recorded. So this session, I have also disabled your videos till the time the session is going. In discussions, we can switch on the videos. So in between, you may not be able to switch on your videos. So next slide, please. Next slide, Shreya. Yes, handing over the session to the chairman of this program, Professor Dr. Tufan Pati, sir. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Lim. To start the meeting, I have good prayers and I record the contribution of the vibrant moderators, Dr. Amrit Parjoshi, IPS General Secretary, Dr. Lim Siddiqui, IPS Treasurer, and Dr. Bisal Chavra. And I'm skipping over the slides because we have to listen to Dr. Alka Subramanian. So, next slide, Shreya. Chairperson slide. So,
So, is my slide visible?
Yes, visible.
yes, it is visible. Dr. K. Sagar, welcome, show. He is currently professor and head of the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry in MINS. Number of years experience in the field. Total post-MD experience 22 years with 13 years in child and adolescent psychiatry. Areas of interest: neurodevelopmental disorders, especially ASD and SLD, adolescent mental health, pediatric psychopharmacology, and child sexual abuse. Number of research papers and conference presentations, publications 100, conference CME workshops and symposia 150 plus. Awards, recognition and positions held. Best outgoing student in MBBS with 9 gold medals, SB Medical College, Tirupati. Dr. S.S. Jairam Award for Best Research Paper, IPS Yokan, 2007, Hyderabad. Indo-USA Bogatti Fellowship, training in the area of ASD at University of Florida, USA. Travel Award for First Regional IM FAR meeting at Shanghai, 2015. Association for Scientific Study of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. Demand site lead for Indo-Canada Autism Network. Welcome, Dr. Vijay Shagar. Next slide, please. We have got Dr. Sarmishta Chakrabarti as the chairperson. Welcome, Dr. Sarmishta. She is senior consultant in Manipal Hospital. Consultant psychiatrist Ramakrishna Mission Seva Pratishthan. Founder director in psychiatry in Hammersmith Hospital. She is an executive committee member of IPS West Bengal branch, represented to the East Zone, chairperson of Positive Psychiatry, chairperson for Women's Specialty Section of Indian Psychiatric Society, appearances in several national programs and television channel, awareness programs in online and offline platforms, columnist in Bengali journals and newspapers, organized several national and international conferences, membership to professional bodies, fellow of Royal College of Psychiatrists, fellow of Indian Psychiatric Society, and she is a member of American Psychiatric Association. Welcome, Dr. Sarmishta.
Thank you, sir.
With this, I hand over the meeting to Dr. Sarmisha Chakrabarti and the chairperson, Dr. Rao, to take over place. From here, the meeting belongs to the chairpersons. One will introduce the
Thank you,
speaker.
sir.
other
I
will
will thank you so much to Thursday Musings, Tufan Pati sir, and all the other respected chairpersons. Without further ado, I think I'll introduce Dr. Alka A. Subramaniam. And I don't think I have enough words to describe Dr. or introduce Dr. Alka Subramaniam, but I'll try my best. Except that she's an excellent and eloquent speaker. Her current designation is Associate Professor of TNMC and Nair Hospital. She has lots of laurels and trainings, awarded fellowship award in 2007, went to State University of New York. And of course, she is a lot of experience in autism spectrum disorder, and she has organized a lot of programs. She herself does a lot for autism spectrum disorder. She has a unit, and I know, she's the president of IAGMH, and of course, she has got an outreach program where she organizes a lot of hands-on training to the and awareness program to the society. Years of experience, of course, 18, but looks like, much more than 30.
Sorry,
A number of awards.
can I interrupt, Sarmishta? This
Yes,
is a very
please.
old slide from 2018, so the
I
years.
know.
So,
This is a very old slide, but of course, in short, introduction of Dr. Alka Subramaniam is excellent speaker, excellent teacher and mentor, excellent friend and philosopher and guide, and really waiting for tonight's presentation. Thank you. Over to Dr. John.
thank you. Thank you so much for that kind introduction.
Thank you.
A very
Dr.
good
John
evening to
will
all.
introduce the
Yeah,
topic. Yes,
yes.
sir.
A very good evening to all of you. At the outset, I thank Indian Psychiatric Society, Odisha State Branch, for having invited me as a chairperson for this Thursday Musings 211th session. And in fact, I was the resource person for one of the earlier sessions of Thursday Musings on ADHD. It was a great learning experience. Coming to the topic, decoding dyslexia, learning disability. Learning disorders, they are known by different names. So we call them as learning disabilities, uh, specific learning disorders, specific developmental disorders, scholastic skills, etc. Different nomenclature have been used uh, across various periods of time, and of course in the classificator systems. These are a group of very unique neurodevelopmental disorders, which are often underdiagnosed, misdiagnosed. There is often a delay in diagnosis of these conditions, and learning disorders present with an interesting range of comorbid disorders, which makes the evaluation as well as the management of these conditions quite challenging for the mental health professionals. And of late, there has been a lot of debate about the uh, assessment tools for these conditions, and also the how to identify these conditions early, and also with the various advancements in psychiatry, especially the neurobiological studies that have happened. Uh, there is a lot of interest in looking at the process underlying these conditions. And this topic is, I would say, of a lot of practical relevance to every mental health professional, especially those who work with child and adolescent population. And the last point I would like to make before I hand over to Dr. Alka is that even in adults, there is a lot of debate going on these days about the learning difficulties and how to actually assess. In fact, there is one ongoing case in Supreme Court, which our institute also has been made respondent to, which we find that there are no specific assessment tools that are available in this population. And with that, like with this very interesting group of disorders, Dr. Alka being the right person who has worked in that area, and she has, as a clinician, academician, as well as the researcher who specifically worked in these group of conditions. And so over to you, ma'am. And I hope that this presentation will provide a lot of practical insights for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Good evening. And at the outset, I'd like to thank the entire team of Musings for having me here today, starting from Tufan Patti sir, Alim, Amrit, and Vishal, for this endeavor to keep 211 sessions strong and going. Thank you, Sarmishta and John, for those very kind words. My background is that I'm a professor of psychiatry at Nair Hospital, where we run a specific learning disorder clinic since the past 18 years. We also have a autism center and a remedial school. Someone has written that the audio and video are not functioning. Can you hear me?
Actually they're working quite fine here.
Yeah, okay, all right. I think the screen is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Today, we are going to, over the next 40 minutes or so, try and understand what dyslexia is from a conceptual paradigm and not from any other view which we have discussed in the past, which is probably diagnostic, nosology, or disability. So let's try and focus and try and understand this, because only if we understand conceptually what is going on in dyslexia, we'll be able to understand how to really pick it up in our clinics and also how we can intervene. Okay, so very simplistically, if you could put in the chat box, okay, the slide. What is your understanding of dyslexia? And like I said, let's keep DSM and ICD aside and let's try and understand clinically, what do you understand by dyslexia? What is your understanding of it? Please put your answers in the chat box so that I can read those answers quickly. Specific reading difficulty, okay. Anybody else? Cortical summation problem, dyscalculia, processing, language norms related to reading and writing. Difficulty in writing, okay. So dyslexia classically is described for difficulty in reading arithmetic, asymmetry of planus temporalis, okay. Difficulty in learning, as humans are expected to learn. Difficulty, allegations that majority of the are getting relaxations for SLC examination. They belong to borderline intellect. Okay, seventh, what is your understanding? Is that your understanding of it, or that's what you're reading in the papers? All right, now let's go on ahead. I think everyone has sort of given me what their understanding of it is. Simple. All of us can see that word on there, and I'm sure all of us have read it. Can you tell me how we read that word? How did you read this word? What processes were involved in reading this word? Again, in the chat box, please. Let
Till
me make it a little
Till
easier.
people write, yeah, till people write, I saw the figures, I mean, I saw the letters, sorry, and an image came in my mind, and
Okay.
and I read it.
Perfect. So people have written visual process, perception and interpretation, phonetics, letter identification. Brilliant. Right. So what you have done with that one single word is all these processes. There was decoding of splitting up the phonemes or the pronunciations into k, a, t, then synthesizing the sounds or the phonemic synthesis. Of course, before that was letter recognition or the graphemes and sight recognition of the word which came from your memory. So all these processes together, they came together to give you this simple word, which is cat. And this is the sequence or the skills for reading or lexicon or lexia, right? So first, there is hearing of words when we are children, then listening to the words and assimilating them or noticing and remembering them. Following this comes understanding words and use of words, sound symbol association, and combining all of these to decode words when we see them in a written format. So the process of reading is not only reading through a visual input. There's a lot that goes on in the brain in terms of lexical memory, in terms of assimilation of sounds, and in terms of experience of how much of exposure there is to us. This sort of completes the reading cycle, right? And when we look at the brain, when we analyze what parts of the brain are really coming to force in this, what we realize is that the Broca's area, the inferior frontal gyrus, is responsible for articulation and word analysis, which we know because we know that when affected by stroke, what happens. The parieto-temporal area is what plays a role in word analysis, and word form or understanding written text is the occipito-temporal, because that's where the visual input comes in. So these three main areas are the ones where we actually see changes occurring during the process of reading. And today, thanks to fMRI images and changes, we are able to actually execute this through a series of experiments as well as processes when we are looking at it. So what do I really see when I see? I am seeing that I'm attending to a word or a string of letters put together. I decode that particular word and see if it's making sense or if is it a nonsensical word. What am I inferring from it? And therefore, how do I interpret this word? So what am I thinking of what I have seen? First step, see. Second, processed in the brain to understand the interpretation of the same. Then, am I able to utilize that interpretation in the current conversation, or am I able to use it in text? And therefore, what is my conclusion about that particular word? What is my point of view, and how am I contextually going to use it, see it, read it, analyze it? So this, again, becomes the process that the brain follows every time I'm reading even a simple thing like cat. And although it seems so mechanical, so spinal for me to read cat, and you're like, why is she emphasizing on cat when we are here to learn about dyslexia? I just want you to understand that the processes of the brain are so beautifully like a set of gears, and they are so well attuned since the time a baby is born that we don't even realize that there is assimilation and synthesis of language since the first time the child starts cooing. And that's the evolution of reading, right? Now let's go on to see a few more examples. So anyone to volunteer? Please read this. Any of the panelists or anyone who can unmute and read this?
Someone with dyslexia may see print like this instead of whole letters and words, which explains to those without dyslexia why it proves difficult to comprehend when reading or writing.
What does that mean? Difficult, no, for us to understand when put like this, but this is what it means. Look at the difference in the text. Look at how you and I have read it, and look at how someone who has dyslexia is reading it. It looks like Swiss cheese with punched holes in it. So when the visual input or the processing is affected, obviously the output is going to be affected. Are we on the same page so far? Yes? All right. Now, just try in your own mind to try and find the errors in this particular sample.
I have some.
At my house, I have some daisies. They are flowers. They grow in the spring. I pick them in the spring. The rain make the flowers grow. And in the summer, they all dry up. That's dry up. And some more flowers grow back. And they have new leaves. And I pick them up again. What kind of errors can you see here? Please post.
Spelling errors.
Yes. What else?
Capital and
Yes.
letter and
Yes.
no full
Punctuation.
stop, and full stop is at the end, so punctuation error.
So spellings, what type of spelling errors?
Daisies, grow,
Hmm.
spring,
So there are additions,
pick.
omissions, flowers, is.
There are additions and yes.
Yes, can you see there are omissions, there are additions, there are some transpositions. I don't see where they interchange the placement of the letters. There are capitalization errors, there are punctuation errors. Yes. So these are the type of errors that you can see in a person who finds it difficult for language acquisition and therefore difficulty in either reading or writing. So we already discussed the errors, but basically there are errors of pronunciation and recognition, multiple of them, but the common ones that we saw is omissions, repetitions, inversions or reversal, which we didn't see in this case, substitutions, difficulty in sight sounds, and somewhat guessing. Now let's look at a few more examples. Look here. This says, what is your favorite time of the day? When I am done with school. Errors there? Do you notice the errors? If you don't, please put it in the chat box. Then I will explain it. My favorite dinner is broccoli cheese soup. Look at the spelling here, okay? Look at the spelling here and look at what we had to ask this child what they meant. Broccoli cheese soup, okay? When I am happy, I usually show it by smiling. Now, what do you see here? Here, there is a lot of use of phonetic speech, which is not translating into written text appropriately because of two reasons. One is the synthesis in the brain phonologically, and of course, English is a little funny language, and therefore it becomes more difficult for English learners who have dyslexia than compared to, say, Chinese learners or French learners where there is more phonetics involved. It does not mean that those various dialects do not have dyslexia or dysgraphia. They do, but it's just that the written text becomes a little more difficult in English because there's so much of discrepancy between the phoneme and the grapheme, right? Then my favorite animal is a whale shark. And if I would want to be an animal, I would be a whale shark. If I have nothing to do on Sunday afternoon, I usually walk in circles. Circles is spelled totally phonetically. There are no spaces over here. There is no punctuation over here. And because the child doesn't realize when you're reading back that there is an error over there, because again, my visual synthesis along with my memory is not telling me that this is wrong. All right, so on and so forth. So kind, space for your stuff, entirely phonetic. And this is what we see in younger learners who have reading and writing difficulties, that you would find the pages filled with phonetics. So it's not like they have not really understood language. It's not really that the language acquisition is not there. It's just that the entire processing, like we saw earlier, is affected, and therefore it comes out like this. Why do you think these errors occur? We discussed about the areas of the brain involved, but why do you think these errors occur? Any guesses?
Faulty wiring.
So very often you would be, they are actually not able to see text the way we can. There are many of them who have a blurry effect or a halo. Some of them where it shakes or swirls. There's overlapping writing, what we call as like a telescoping in the one word inside the other, a washout effect or up and down seesaw and reverse effect. There was a very famous Indian movie on dyslexia called Tare Zameen Par, in which the main character showed all the time that the letters were dancing. And people wondered, does this really happen after the movie? Well, incidentally, we have finally been able to actually codify it. And this is exactly how children with dyslexia are able to read. What's happening to you when you're reading the text like this? Please tell me. What do you feel like? What is happening when you're reading this text? Getting confused with the words, yes. What else? What does this remind you of? It reminds me of a flickering tube light which requires voltage stabilization. It's extremely annoying. You're not able to focus, you're not able to understand, and it gets you completely disoriented with reading. And what will happen to the child who sees text like this? They're going to avoid reading completely. So these are the various ways in which the visual stimulus itself gets affected, and therefore the processing and the output will obviously get affected. So at every step, this child is having difficulty, because remember those three main areas, and that's going to keep coming again and again, are affected, right? So when we look at the lexical networks and we try and decode them in the brain, this is extremely simplistic. I'm not saying that this is the gold standard, but this is somewhere where we can start, and this is somewhere where we can understand it from a structural point of view. So we'll go to the simplest regions, which are the occipital region for visual inputs, right? And then this is the brain letterbox, which is the visual word form area, which also uses memory. It is called the ventral occipitotemporal region. We have the posterior parietal region, which deals with attention and serial reading, one after the other, so that I can synthesize the entire text when I'm reading it and try and assimilate it to comprehend what I'm talking about. I'm going to repeat that. If I'm given a passage, I need to be able to read it sequentially, to be able to synthesize it, to be able to process it so that my comprehension is accurate. And that's where the posterior parietal region plays an important role. And then, of course, we have the pronunciation and articulation cortical loop, if I may call it, which comprises of the precentral region, the superior temporal region, the anterior insula, the supramarginal gyrus, and the superior temporal region, and of course, the meaning or the lexical meaning, the semantics, if I may, inferior frontal region, anterior temporal region, angular gyrus, middle temporal region, and the anterior fusiform region. So you see how complex even a simple task like reading cat has now become. And Alim has, of course, said it's become a complicated cat, and I totally agree with you. The other way to describe these circuits is the decoding pathway, which is the dorsal circuits, which is mostly concerned with conversion of sounds. So sound to meaning, spelling to sound conversion, and to some extent, spelling to meaning conversion. And of course, the ventral circuit, which is the red one in the red arrows, where you have reading aloud, predictive reading, spelling to meaning conversion, and visual input or visual conversion to spelling. So these decoding pathway, as well as the sight recognition pathway, both have to work in synthesis in order for us to give a cogent output which will have any meaning and which will be of importance to my brain, so that I memorize it and I put in a tick mark over there that, okay, this is a sight word that I'm going to be able to pick up the next time and use it with reference to context. So that's really a complex task and the processing of that. So decoding along with listening comprehension, using all these processes, visuospatial, phonological, the mental age, activation of naming, etc. Listening, comprehension, and decoding together will give you accurate reading comprehension, as we have just done. And therefore, a combination of cognition with knowledge, which could be acquired, but there has to be some degree of motivation, perseverance, and curiosity in the learner too, in order for us to make that difference. And this becomes important in other cases, which we will see shortly. So therefore, my next question is, why is it that whatever we discussed till now are errors specific to dyslexia? Why not other neurodevelopmental disorders? Please answer in the chat box, sorry. I'm not able to see the chat box for some reason. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please answer in the chat box. Why are these errors specific to dyslexia? How come whatever we discussed till now, whatever you all said, errors, omission, commission, and so on and so forth, everything, why is it not something which is universal across all neurodevelopmental disorders? How do you differentiate? How do you say this is specific to dyslexia? Please answer in the chat box. Unique neurobiological, difficult, okay. Wide network, okay. What else? Genetics, all right. So when you say other disorders mostly have low IQ, what does that mean? Because only language processing areas are affected. Okay. All right, now let's go to the next example. Let's look at this. Please read this to yourself and start typing out the errors and what you think is wrong with this particular sample. Compared to the previous sample that we saw, the daisies one, please keep that in the back of your mind and tell me what errors you're able to find out in this. Sentence formation, alignment. One second, sorry. Alignment, chronological, sentence formation, tenses, overwhelmed with words, birthday, amazing, very good. Okay. All right. Do you think prima facie this person is suffering from dyslexia? How many of you are confident in diagnosing this as dyslexia? I don't see very many yeses coming. All right, let's go to the next sample. What about this one? Please notice the grades also, huh? That was also grade 9. Please type in the chat box what you think are the errors here and what you think. Grammatical errors, okay. No full stops, suggesting below average intelligence, not in the correct straight line, punctuation, grammar, spelling, sentence formation. So what are you really looking for here when you all are telling me all this? Our special educator and head psychologist, Simran and Sheetal at our clinic, over the years have coined this acronym called as VOICE, vocabulary, organization, ideation, content, and expression, to look at all writing samples to try and understand where to fit in children, because sometimes qualitatively it does become difficult to actually tell where the child fits in and how do we really differentiate across all of them. Because see, the child is not coming to you with a diagnosis saying that this is what I have and therefore I will have only this error. The errors overlap. And what we have to see is which is more, and thereby give us a clue as to what clinically we feel the child is going towards, right? And this is the reason why we find those who have lower intellectual ability don't have so much of a discrepancy when we see their writing vis-a-vis what we expect their content to be, as opposed to those who have dyslexia. And we will come to this a little later again. Now look at this again, keeping voice in mind. So look at the vocabulary, look at the organization, look at the ideation, look at the content, and look at the expression. What do you find? Is it up to grade 9 mark? Any of it? Not really. And the next one is even lesser, right? So what we find with those who have neurodevelopmental disorders other than dyslexia, in fact, who have intellectual disability. So the first sample was that of a slow learner. And the second one is of someone who has intellectual disability. And why we find this discrepancy is because, as you can see, in typical reading, the 3 areas, that is one thing which you should remember to take home today, if nothing else, are activated. But in those who are struggling with reading for whatever XYZ reason, apart from dyslexia, will have smaller regions activated and in smaller amounts. What I mean is that the functionality itself is much lesser, and thereby you find everything much lesser. Content, ideation, vocabulary, everything globally gets affected. And this becomes important when we want to intervene too. So hold that thought. Okay. And now let's look at this. Thoughts on this one, please, in the chat box. Grade 7. What are you seeing over here? What are you seeing here? The topic is on sport and there has been a lot written on it. But tell me, what are you seeing? You can either tell me errors or no errors, whatever it is that comes to mind, but please, no chronological order, you mean? Okay. All right. Not really, but more than chronological. Is organization really missing? No errors, but there is something which is missing. What is it? Tanu, you're saying no errors, but there's something in this which is missing. What kind of sentences or what kind of essay, if I may call it, is this? Spacing is okay. Ideation, Nidhi, ideation, what in the ideation? What is it that is really lacking? When we teach students to write, okay, we want expressivity. When we say expression, what is it in the expression that you want besides what is written here? What is written here is facts. When you say, I want a colorful essay or I want something with lovely expression, what is that element that you expect the child to put in there to make it more exciting to read? Variety, yes. What else? What else? That's right, Radhika. What else? Personalization. So you want emotions. Are we seeing any emotions in this? Except the last line where he has written, I love cricket and I will win a trophy. But is there any passion coming out in that? That love for cricket, whatever is coming is in a factual way. So what is this likely to be? When there is no imagination, there's no personalization, there's no emotion, there's expression which is down, most likely to be? Yes, ASD. And do you see now the difference between this and the daisies, where he could recreate a summer day for us, despite the fact that his spellings were so wrong, he didn't have punctuation, you could still feel the flow. You could feel that there was emotion attached to it, right? So that individual has capacity, but no expression. This individual also has capacity, but expression is limited. It's limited because of the disorder. And now, the next sample. While you're seeing that sample, I'm going to answer that question that we can diagnose dyslexia in Hindi and in other vernacular languages. We use something called as curriculum-based testing, where we test whether they are doing age-appropriate stuff based on whatever their current curriculum is. And there is a curriculum-based test available in the country. Also, we have the DALI, which is a screening test in various languages. Why is it ASD, Rajiv? Yes, mentioning a favorite IPL does show emotions, but we're not talking necessarily of ASD this time. So don't get stuck to one thing. What do you notice about this particular paragraph? How has this individual or this child written this? Please tell me. Grade 6. Yeah, why is there numbering? Why points? Why numbering? Which kind of children need points or numbering? Okay, very good. So told to write 10 lines. Which are the OCD needs to be told numbering? Now I think Alim, Amrit, you all have to start giving tea and coffee on Thursday musings. Huh? OC will do it automatically, no? Why this child has been told to write in this fashion? Very good. Why do you think ADHD? Because if this child is not told to write 10 lines, what will happen to the child's writing? It'll be all over the place. So in terms of content, in terms of emotion, in terms of ideation, I'm there. But I would be disorganized and all over the place if I don't tell this child to write in this way. Are we able to understand how a writing sample can be decoded? We have seen classical dyslexia. We have seen someone with a lower intellect. We have seen ASD being literal. We are now seeing ADHD. Yes? Is it all falling into place a little bit? All right. Now please read this again and tell me what are the errors. Yes. Let's focus on the errors, please. Spelling errors, phonetic speech, errors in phonetics. Yes, different, same word spelled differently in the same sample. This is very classically seen in dyslexia. Anyone has any doubts about this? And do we have any other error which we had not seen earlier? Can someone please point out one error from the first half of the written text to the second half? There is one error which is very clearly standing out. If you all can please. Yes, excellent, Nima. Publisher, there is a reversal of the B and D. Please see this. Publishing, publisher. Right? And this is a classical example of dyslexic sample. This is because of the jumble that happens in the brain when there's the visual input, the visuospatial processing, the phonological processing, and of course the output, which leads to the child who will have difficulty in spelling the cat that we all spelt and read so easily. Therefore, inability to read out in class, confusing letters, and finally, when they actually process it, what will happen? This is what the transposition I was talking to you about. Animal becomes aminal, and that's what's written over there. And the teachers who don't know about it, of course, now the B.Ed curriculum has fortunately changed and most teachers know about it, tend to reprimand the child that these are silly errors. Why are you making these silly errors, right? And let's not forget our 3 areas for phonemic pronunciation, articulation, analysis and grapheme, language comprehension, and of course the brain's letterbox, which will, synthesis of which will finally give us the entire pyramid of reading, which includes phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, and other fundamental skills. So we need so much of synthesis in order to read even simplistic words as we go ahead. All right, now I need a volunteer to read this, please. Can someone unmute? Read it verbatim. Who's reading, please, out loud? Suddenly everyone has disappeared. Come on.
Just trying to. Yeah, Janaki wants to read. So, Janaki, if you can raise your hand, we can unmute.
On September 21, 666, a fire started in the city of Dunlan in the Higgs Baker Hose. In a pudding lane The fire spread rapidly. To begin with, Tay, poorer, Queckle stayed in their house unit. At very last minute, lots of Queckle ran towards river. At Messent through their poses sins into it. Attempts were made to post the progress of the fire by pulling dom houses in its path. But finally, parties of sailors blah houses with gunpowder to make gunpowder, yeah, to make k wide gaps the flames could not reach across. Fire burnt down 84 churches, including old St. Paul's Nanny Finn buildings and 100 of wooden houses, which were built very close together. It destroyed filthy alleys and narrow streets and cleansed the town of all traces of the lag.
Fantastic, Janki. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Did you all hear that? What did it sound like? What did it sound like?
Gibberish.
Okay. Apart from gibberish, what else? What was with, yeah, London fire story, but what was the
Incomplete.
issue reading?
Incomplete words.
Why were they incomplete? There were pauses, excellent. Letter reversal, very good. What else?
Yeah, parts sticking
vowels.
to other parts.
Vowels.
Yes, so
IOU.
we chunk information and we synthesize it so that it becomes lexically comprehensible. Here, there was so much of struggle to read the words that the auditory processing is completely off. And I'm giving you some examples of problems with auditory processing, not related to this passage, but we will come back to this passage again. Okay. So samples of auditory errors. For example, thin becomes thing or think. Brass is grass. Axe is axe. Rice and rice. Terrorist and terrorist. Anger, hanger. Modern, model. Guide, guard. Wandering, wandering. Now we are going to go back to that particular sample. And Janki, can you please read it how you think the original one would have been?
On September 2nd, 21666, that I don't understand what that could be.
1999.
1999. Oh, okay. A fire started in the city of London in the King's Baker House in a Pudding Lane. Pudding. The fire.
Oh, was additional. Okay.
The fire spread rapidly through, though to begin with, the poorer people stayed in their houses until the very last minute. Lots of people ran towards the river and Messent, I don't know what that is. Through men through their possessions in attempts were made to post the progress of the fire by pulling down houses in the.
So they threw their possessions into it. Full stop. Attempts were made to post the. Go ahead.
Post the progress
of the fire.
Pause the progress of the fire. Okay. By pulling down houses in its path. Okay. But finally, parties of sailors blew up houses with gunpowder to make wide gaps. The flames could not reach across, and fire burned down 84 churches, including
across. Full stop.
Across full stop.
Yes.
The fire burned down 84 churches, including of St. Paul's Nanny Finn buildings and hundreds of wooden houses, which were built very close together. It destroyed fill the alleys and narrow streets and cleanse the town of all traces of the plague.
How much we have struggled to read this paragraph with normal lexical development, right? That is exactly the distress that a child with dyslexia has when they are reading what we tell them to read in a fashion that we understand it. Is this making a little bit of cogent sense now? This is the struggle they have, and this is what brings down the self-esteem also, and their understanding that they are different from others. This particular error occurs because of problems with auditory processing. The auditory apparatus is not a problem. So if you test the auditory apparatus, it's fine. But again, look at our brain. The integration, the synthesis, the understanding of auditory input, just like we looked at the visual input where the numbers, the letters were jumping. Similarly, in auditory processing, we have sound, signs, symbols, and stimuli, which are not filtered out as they should be. But auditory processing as a singular feature cuts across all neurodevelopmental disorders, and it's not exclusive for dyslexia. So people who have central auditory processing disorder or problems from birth are people who are high risk and should be watched ahead for problems with learning, right? So this again brings us to our discrepancy model, whereby in those who have lower IQ, though they may have auditory processing issues, the discrepancy is not so wide as those with dyslexia. And we find that though capacity is there, the ability to show up in scholastic work is grossly deficient, right? And here we can see this child who is 14 years old, and we find this is grade equivalent. This is Woodcock-Johnson test for assessment of achievement. And here we find broad reading is at 4.8. Now, when you're saying 14 years old, the child is mostly going to be in 9th grade or maybe 8th grade. And here you have the difficulty level at grade 4 for broad reading, 3 for written language, but math is not a problem. It's at 13, which is actually above par. And very often we see this kind of a scatter in children who have dyslexia, right? So in a nutshell, what we have seen till now is the brain abnormality, which forms the biological basis for a reading problem, which leads to obviously translation in a cognitive domain, which covers the attention, phonology, graphemes, and results in therefore poor planning, sequencing, reading, writing, naming, and overall poor achievement, which is usually picked up only after 2 years of formal school education. So we don't test before the age of 8 years old because there is no exposure to understand whether the discrepancy is there or whether the content is overall low. So now that you know that this is how the dyslexic brain functions, what is the solution? How do we help these children?
Special education.
Special education. So what is remedial education or special education? What is it basically? Again, no fancy explanations, no fancy definitions. I just want what your understanding of remedial education is. What do you understand by remedial education or special education? What are we doing in that?
My understanding is breaking down what we think is simple into a smaller part, digestible part for the kid, and go to the really basic of maybe word formation, sentence formation, and start from there. Similarly for dysgraphia also, go to the basics of maths, go to the basics of writing, and break it down to small parts.
what are we really doing when you're saying break it down or go to the basics? What does this really mean? What are we doing?
Like,
What are the deficits that we talked about?
so different, like what we're trying to do is, because we understand their processing power is weak or different, we're trying to bring it down to the smallest chunk possible, which is easier for the child to grasp
All right.
and build on that.
So a lot of you have written things like simplify, accommodate, chunking, phonetics, extra time. What I want is broadly your understanding of remedial education and the principle it works on. And that is a multimodal approach to retrain the brain. See, this example that I give all patients or parents and children who come to us with dyslexia is, supposing you're sitting in wherever you're sitting right now, and there are 2 tube lights on, right? The switch should be in that room. But supposing you switch on the switch and only 1 tube light comes on, you will investigate what is wrong with the second tube light. And someone tells you, well, it so happens that while they were planning the building, they just put the switch of that tube light in room 3 instead of in your room. So is there fundamentally something wrong with the tube light? Yes or no? Is there something fundamentally wrong with the tube light? No, right? It is just the wiring that is different, and therefore it needs a different switch for it to work. And that is what remediation is. It is a different approach to retrain the brain using the principle of neuroplasticity. We assume that the brain will change the way it works, provided I stimulate it in the right way. And Maharashtra Dyslexia Association, most of the dyslexia associations have a famous tagline: if I can't learn the way you teach, then please teach me the way that I learn. And that's, in a nutshell, what remediation is. So I don't want to confuse you more, but let's try and understand this from a different perspective. Okay, so here are a few examples of what remedial principles are, and I'm going to quickly go through that because I want to show you some live examples a little later. So for example, the rule of C. Okay, so the hard C, cut, cat, pot, king, kettle, all of them are pronounced the same way, but this is K, K, and this is C, K. Similarly, if I want to teach a child about the word astonished, how do I make it interesting for them to understand the word, to understand a synonym, and understand how to use it in a sentence? How do I explain that I before E comes in relief, whereas when I'm talking about deceive, it hops over E? Using patterns, using boxes to make sure word formation, letter word identification, formation, and expression all synthesize. And my favorite, which all children love, is something called as mind maps. So I've put this out a little more in explanation, and you can do this across your clinics, where you teach them to make branches of a tree and put in their thoughts there, like this child has done. Causes of water pollution, drainage, soil erosion, fertilizers, domestic, etc., etc. And this helps them synthesize the information when they have to write a big paragraph on it, which is where the problem occurs. Because descriptive text is where all my errors will show up. And how do I synthesize and organize myself? Mind maps helps a lot. Now let's look at this example. And please pay close attention to what she's doing and what the child is doing, and we will discuss that, okay?
C, B. After all finished, lift, him, him, fit, pit, tip, hit. Pink. Yes, very good. Pink. Pink. Fit. Fit. Lit. Lit. Chick. 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 Rig. Ig. Ig. Zig. Rig. Rig. Pin. 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 In. Big. Rig. Lip. Lip. Big. Big. Jig. Big. 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 Yes, tell me. What did you see? What was happening over there?
Similar sounding words
Okay.
were being taught so that the child is able to understand the difference between, like how you would do with C and K, right? I think
Okay.
that's a similar thing which was used here.
Anybody else? Flashcard learning, multimedia training, okay. Similar sounds with consonants moving front to back, yes. Lot of grapheme phoneme matching, yes. So we had a single vowel with different consonants at the end to try and create a memory. And then we made it faster and faster. What did you notice about what was she doing with the flashcards every time that the child was making an error? What was she doing with the flashcard?
She's taking it back.
She was taking it back. So when she started off, she read it and he repeated after her. After about 5 to 7 cards, when he became comfortable, she stopped reading out to him and let him read himself. And then every time he made an error, she would repeat that word. And if he yet made the error, that card went behind, because that means there is no acquisition of that particular sound or that particular word, and that had to be repeated. So till the deck of cards is over, she's going to keep doing this. So there's drill and practice along with stimulus. Do you see that? Yes? All right. See. So here in the dyslexic brain, these two areas, the parietotemporal and occipitotemporal, are not getting activated. It's only the Broca's which get activated. So there's so much of guesswork, right? There's so much of guesswork. So the issue of the cognitive deficit is a very specific deficit and not generalized like you see in people who have lower cognitive ability. And therefore, the output becomes unexpected. This gives rise to the discrepancy model, whereas what remains consistent is the weakness and the academic output if not intervened, which is what we take strength of when we are talking about remedial education or cognitive retraining. So here we saw problems with localization, orientation, attention, auditory attention, possibly visual-verbal and visual-spatial coordination also, simultaneosia or attention to multiple objects we have not used over here, so we cannot comment on it. And therefore, like I said, this area which is used, the Broca's, is more for guesswork, and that's what the child often resorts to, right? So this was a seminal paper in 2018 where they actually worked on how the strengths and the weaknesses model in dyslexia can be used to really improve remediation. And the relative weaknesses, as we saw, were phonological processing, attention, cognition, and information in general. And the strengths are visual spatial, IQ, of course, cognition, and character traits. Some of these children have very unique ways of learning, and they are very persistent learners. And we must really encourage that in classrooms as well, and try and see how we can bring about change or transformation in that child, right? So this again is Scarborough's cord or thread of learning,
which is very important for us to understand, not only from the point of view of prognosis of the remediation, but also to tell us the difference between the type of learning. Just pay a little attention to this. So here, what we are working on is word recognition through phonology, decoding, and sight recognition. And this becomes an increasingly automatic activity which occurs due to drill and practice, right? Whereas background knowledge, acquisition of vocabulary, language synthesis or structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy are things which you will increasingly make the complexity more difficult and make it more and more and more strategic. Tell me, a dyslexic learner, will they learn in both ways, or will they learn more strategically or more automatically, vis-a-vis a person who's a slow learner? Did you understand my question? Who is going to learn more strategically and who is going to learn more automatically? Strategically, the dyslexic will learn more because we have the baseline cognitive reserve or cognitive ability. So once we introduce the remediation, we find that increasing strategy or increasing complexity of tasks is adopted. Vis-a-vis someone who has either is a slow learner with a lower cognitive capacity, or someone who has rigidity, inflexibility like ASD, or someone with an emotional disorder like OCD, where they rely mostly on the increasingly automatic skills. So therefore, this is beautiful to understand prognosis of remediation from that perspective. Now let's look at this video and please see and type in the chat box what you think is being done over here as it's happening.
You have to simultaneously write. The keyword. Should not write or guest house. Shape a diagram or a combination. When you put a combination, you need the diagram. The diagram, because it is giving you once, there's one. I know.
Yes, tell me, what has she been doing with him and what all has she been doing with him? Tracing the alphabet on the table, okay. What else? Writing the word, telling the word or the letter. Hand movements differ from mirrored letters using kinesthetic modality for learning. He's spelling and writing with his finger. All right. Phoneme, grapheme, association, sounds. So the first thing was the letter recognition, which is a visual input. Then he is writing the letter using his hand, right? So that's a tactile use, another sensory input. And then what did he do? He pronounced it. Yes. What is VAKT? Please, Priyanka. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile. So we use different methods for synthesizing the input. So then he pronounced the sound, and every time he mispronounced, she took it back again. And finally, he used that particular phoneme in a correct word with the correct pronunciation. Do you see the synthesis? And a step forward from the last one, where he was just at the stage of sight recognition of words. So this is how we are retraining the brain to use all our sensory modalities in order for us to read better and write better. So writing is in fact more complex because it involves the cerebellum too. And though you need the entire phonological loop and working memory, but you also need appropriate motor skills in order to write appropriately. And what we have seen with good writers and poor writers is that there is differences in the uptake in the brain, where the poorer writers have more of visual monitoring or areas which are working. So does it really work? Do you think remedial education works? Please put in the chat box what you think. Yes, no, maybe so, don't know, anything. And how do we really know it works? Because they get better marks, because our whole system works only on marks, right? And this is a lot of intensive work which parents are not willing to go in for. They'll say, can the remedial teacher also be tuition teacher? देखो मार्क आएगा तो हम भेजेंगे. All right. Fortunately, we have this paper which was published recently in 2022, showing that one-on-one instruction actually made a difference in the uptake in fMRI images when we used phonological processing, decoding, multisensory, and visual imagery instructions. And you can see over here, there was a significant difference. Of course, this is just the profile of 8 children, but significant difference in those who had received that 80 hours of training, which is why in the beginning, you would have seen the cross, and we now call it, even John said, we don't really use the word disability, but disorder, because it's not really a disability. And I personally really don't like the word. I actually prefer using differential ability, and ICD-11 has done us justice by calling it disorder, and so has DSM, right? So quickly to recap, we studied today, or we went through today, what are the brain changes that take place in dyslexia? What were the different types of reading errors? Reading errors across dyslexia, low IQ, ADHD, ASD, and so on and so forth. We also saw a reading sample, not only a writing sample. What are the principles of remedial education and how it differs in readers and writers? And what are the brain areas which are improved with intervention and remediation? And I hope that after this, you manage to decode dyslexia in your clinics much better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. We are much more organized now because of your inputs. Thank you so much. So over to chairpersons for their opening remarks. And you can stop the share now, which is through.
Okay, sorry. Yes.
Thank you, madam. And I think all of us would agree that Dr. Alka has presented this very complex topic, I would say, with a lot of practical kind of examples, and also the way she brought in the neurobiological substrates along with the practical examples of the reading difficulties and across the neurodevelopmental spectrum. Thank you, ma'am. And she also made it very active participant discussion possible, like by asking several questions, and many of the participants, they had raised relevant points, and also think Madam's presentation had a lot of useful insights for them.
Thank you so
So,
much, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alka. I think you've
Consider-
decoded dyslexia in our mind too, and you know, the simplicity and the way you divided everything, and it's much clearer to all of us, and the participation of the participate. This is typical Alka style presentation, which everybody loves and learns a lot more than typical presentations. So any questions? I think we'll take it now. I think you've answered most of the questions, and you question more. And let's see if there are questions.
I also just want to say, if you permit me over here, that one of the first books on SLD, the Indian perspective, you have John as chairperson here, and me, we have edited that book, and we have authors across the country who have contributed to it. So if you get a chance, that will also help in understanding SLD in a much better way from the Indian subcontinent. So do have a look at it.
Absolutely, ma'am. Absolutely.
Can you tell me the name? I'll write it in the chat.
Specific
There is a
learning disorders.
question.
Specific
Yeah.
learning disorders and Indian perspective. I'll put it in the chat.
That'll be great. Thank you.
Can a person have dyslexia in one language but be fluent in another? Is a question by Dr. Janki.
Not really. Not really. Though we do find that dual lingual is more difficult for people with dyslexia, which is why we often encourage, you know that the concessions given in the board is that they are allowed to drop languages, because when they have to learn more than one language, it just becomes too difficult for them to synthesize so much of information. But to say that I am dyslexic in English and not dyslexic in Hindi does not really make sense. The brain is still processing information, right? So we can't really talk about that.
How good
Are
are
all
the tests?
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. How good are the tests we have for dyslexia as of now?
How many tests do we have?
No. How good are the tests we have in India for dyslexia now?
John already spoke about that. So we do not have too many indigenous tests for dyslexia, and that is a big lacuna. See, also, we are the only country which has this model of this benchmark disability, where you need to qualify 40% so that you get the disability benefits, which actually doesn't hold true for dyslexia and other neurodevelopmental disorders. With remediation and with intervention, we want them to improve. And then if you improve and you don't reach that benchmark, you're not going to get the help. So our government in Maharashtra, we have actually managed to separate the two. If you have a diagnosis, you get benefits from an educational perspective, but you cannot avail of quota benefits, you cannot avail of income tax benefits, so on and so forth. And coming back to your main question about tests. So we don't have tests which are anyways picking up that 40%. We don't have tests which are good for vernacular languages. DALI is a screening test which has come about. NIMHANS has come out with the second version, but age is still a limitation. And I'm hoping that John and his team managed to expand that and we could have it for all ages. So right now they are dealing with a court case of an adult who's getting into a professional course, and that is the problem, because how do you test and how do you qualify that this is dyslexia? So these are some of the issues which are there. Also, our Disability Act talks about assessing IQ through VSMS, because universally that's easier to assess, but then that becomes a big limitation when you're talking about SLD and dyslexia.
Thank you. But Mr. was asking something.
Genetic reasons for dyslexia. You don't have any specific concrete genes that we can attribute it to, but it does run in families, and we have seen that learning as an acquired genetic trait does become an issue. So you might find in one family, you have one index case who has dyslexia. There'll be some cousin who has ID. There may be an uncle or a mom or dad who has ADHD. So it's more like neurodevelopmental disorders under that umbrella. Okay, we've answered that. The name of the book. 4% of doctors have SLD. Maybe dyscalculia. Possibly. We'll have to look at their accounts and see. Okay, can SLD and ASD coexist in the same child? Absolutely. Like I said, across neurodevelopmental disorders, we do not have, our children do not come with DSM-5 and ICD-10. Please, we are not fitting them into compartments. They are fluid. They have symptoms of everything, right? We have to see what is more to fit into the requirement for the disability quota, for so on and so forth. But in terms of our clinical diagnosis, you can definitely diagnose both together. Please do not exclude it if you feel both are coexisting. How to make a remedial kit or where to buy? Well, we do not have ready-made remedial kits, but you have ready-made systems. So the system that you saw our remedial educators using is called the Sonde system. Like that, there are multiple systems available, and now you have multiple apps, AI-generated tools, so on and so forth to help with remediation. So even if you just do a simple Google search and try it on, there's Forrestein's enrichment tool. There are lots which I'm not really going to go into, but rest assured that you will be able to buy it off the net, and some of them are not available in India. Pearson's does provide some of them, and some of them you can get off Amazon or order them directly from the website. Which IQ test is ideal in children with SLD? We still use WISC, and we use the discrepancy model, only for the reason that we do not have the response to intervention model. Ideally speaking, according to DSM-5, we are supposed to do remediation first, see Scarbaugh's rope, how the child is learning, and then decide whether we want to go in for formal testing or not. We don't have that much. We are a resource-deprived country as far as special educators and psychologists are concerned. So therefore, we still use the Wechsler scale, and we use the discrepancy model to see achievement and the IQ, and note that if there is a discrepancy, then yes, probably the child has dyslexia. This IQ difference between dyslexia and dyscalculia, no. Thank you, sir. Yes, someone's put the book. How kind of you. How many years of remedial training needed before certifying the disability in SLD? You mean for the child? No, you don't need remedial training for the child before certifying SLD. If the child has SLD, we will certify SLD, and you can have remediation going alongside. If you're talking about the teacher, it's an MEd course, so that many number of years. How can separation of disorder from disability work? If they have disorder, they should be eligible for disability benefits. I am not talking about separation, Sebin. I'm talking about stigma. The word disability connotes stigma, and we are here trying to fight stigma at all levels. So it's very important, particularly for a child, to understand that it's differential ability, and therefore give them the concessions despite whether we, in our nomenclature, call it disability or disorder. Can one have SLD in Devanagari and fluent in Dravidian script? Most unlikely. We already discussed that. Some children are poor in language but excellent in maths. Yes, they can be excellent in maths, but they get stuck in word problems. They get stuck in trigo because they have to read and use lexical advantage over there. So if you are able to delineate the fact that the calculation part of it is good, and it is the lexical input of maths which is getting affected, then you're able to delineate the fact that it is not dyscalculia, but it is dyslexia, and you teach them the language of math so that the child is not labeled as dyscalculia. Is the prevalence of dyslexia on the rise, or is it simply being diagnosed more often? Very good question. That's an excellent question. See, I'm not sure whether in terms of evolution, there is a change which has occurred as far as dyslexia is concerned. We always knew that there were readers and writers who were slow in school, even way back like 40 years ago or whatever, 50 years ago. The point is that when we compare with other neurodevelopmental disorders, we definitely see that there is a genetic dissonance and there is an increase. So my assumption is that the percentage prevalence might have gone up slightly, but what is more important is that we are definitely diagnosing better and earlier. Is it enough? It's not enough. We don't have enough people, personnel, trained people to pick it up. And unfortunately, a standalone clinician or a standalone place is not able to give those certificates. We still have to give it through the government colleges. So now, at least I can talk about Maharashtra. All government colleges, it is mandatory to have the LD testing centers so that we help these children. And maybe that's why it's reflecting as a higher prevalence. And in liberty in colleges like Maharashtra boards, liberty in the sense, I didn't understand. They are given concessions at a school as well as college level. Once they reach professional level, which many of our children have now achieved, most of the time in professional colleges, they get extra time and they can use assistive devices. With that, they manage. How to differentiate a child in dyslexia with dyslexia and normal IQ, but poor basics. So the intervention, the rope model and the learning curve. Is there a discrepancy in English regional language? And can we still diagnose SLD? Very good question. I didn't show that because I didn't want to complicate it further. You may have children with language barrier. What do I mean by language barrier? I find English difficult and therefore it manifests as a problem with reading and writing. What I have to do for this kind of child is to have language enrichment. Once I suspect, then I'm not sure whether this child has dyslexic type of learning or it is because of language acquisition. I abort my testing and I say, go in for language enrichment for 6 months and come back to me. When you come back to me and I find that the curve has changed, it was most likely a language barrier. And the proficiency or the inefficiency was because of the language acquisition per se, and not because of the dyslexia. Apps for parents who don't have access to remedial education in their, off my head, I do not remember, but can I just ask Thursday Musings to disseminate it? I will get back to you on that. Okay, how to go about assessing SLD in adults? We use Woodcock-Johnson because Woodcock-Johnson is still 99 years of age. And we have had adults, we still get adults, especially now because it is mandated to have UDID certification at the age of 18. So many of them come back and we test them. We have people who are coming to us at 23 years of age. We have had parents of children with LD who are doing courses like law, or those who are, I think the oldest we've had is someone who was 55 years of age who decided to do law with his son and said, I'm very sure that I also have LD. And we said, okay, fine. If you feel so, we can definitely test you. Of course, it's a different thing. It didn't turn out to be, and we didn't suspect it. Response to intervention concept is where it's basically remediation, but we have to do it at a school level where we first start giving the special education to the child and watching that trajectory, the learning curve, which side it's going. Once we realize that the learning curve is going in X direction, which points towards dyslexia, we do the formal testing. Whereas if we feel it's towards slow learner, we need not do the testing. So that's the RTI model, which is followed in the West. How can separation of disorder from that is again, okay. Thank you. Almost everyone is getting LD certificate in 10th standard. I don't think so. John, would you think so? I don't think almost everyone is getting. We're pretty objective
No,
about.
no, madam. The scenario what we are seeing is there are many parents who are approaching the testing center, like especially say if you take the example of Karnataka, there are very few centers, and most of them they come to NIMHANS, and wherein like just before the 10th or 12th board exams, they just come and they request us to carry out the assessments at the earliest and give these letters or certificates to allow the concessions. And as you had rightly pointed out, that the number of trained professionals is very limited, actually, those who exclusively work in this area. And also, it becomes very difficult to carry out these assessments because these have to be scheduled in the midst of other clinical work and takes a lot of time. And typically, there is a waiting period. And so sometimes when they come just before exams, parents don't understand. And also there is some of the process that you mentioned when you were explaining about these conditions. There is a lot of lack of awareness, I would say, that among the parents. And their simple this thing is, I approach this center and they should issue a certificate for the child, so that child will automatically get these concessions. And also, when compared to the other developmental conditions, uh, there is no specific percentage for this. So that's the other challenge. Like when we talk about uh, the other conditions which have been classified under the RPWD Act, where that 40% benchmark disability. So using the available tools, like we don't have that percentage kind of calculation. That is a major drawback. And time and again, actually, even the cases that end up in the courts, also courts keep asking this question, saying that can you give a percentage to this particular uh, difficulty what the child is facing. So with available tools, it is not possible. So we can. That's where I think the point that you very well explained, saying that the nomenclature. I think better to use a specific learning disorders kind of nomenclature, and then of course based on the thorough evaluation, eligible children have to provide the concessions. I think we should not deprive them of the concessions that are available in the respective, whether it's CBSE, ICSE, or state board.
Yes, thank you.
And-
How to objectively, I put in some of the apps and we have some new tools. So even Microsoft has text to speech learning, which you can modify the word and try and understand that. So when the speech, these are reading tools as well as phonetic tools, which Microsoft has, and one can buy those. And we also have mastoid stimulators, which sort of vibrates and helps the child hear their own word as an echo and helps with phoneme acquisition. How to objectively identify adequate school teacher exposure. Many times one teacher for 1 to 6 class and sitting in one class. This is especially in government schools. Asking for SLD disability certificate. Absolutely. We need to invest more money in education and in teachers. The countries which have the best outcomes in terms of children's educational as well as happiness overall outcomes are the ones who invest maximum in teachers, like Finland and Japan. So please, everyone can make an effort to write to the ministry and do that. Which branch is good for such a student after 12th in your view? Any branch, provided the child is interested. There's nothing stopping them from taking anything that they want. There are children who have gone to IIT, children in medicine, children in arts, children in fine arts. The sky is the limit. Dr. Kishore did a ICMR project on disability. Yeah, so he has, the NIMHANS battery 2 has come out thanks to that. And for slow learners, we can't give a disability certificate of 40%. Because nowadays the UDID card is required. So we can give the UDID card with 25% and they can get some leeway of extra time, but they don't get disability benefits. Can we do Nimhan's SLD battery? CBSE gives concessions just 2 days before the child's exam. That's not really true. We give to CBSE students as early as 8 months before if they have the certificate. So CBSE is kind enough to accept certificates even 2 days before. We have to be grateful to them. CBSE and ICSE, we have given children certificates who've come to us at the nth hour and they have accepted it the day before the exam and given the child this concession and this thing. So I think that's wonderful on their part. Is it fair to say that in SLD, language comprehension or dorsal circuit is less functional and the whole world recognition is more dysfunctional? It is asymmetrical, and that's what we are training, retraining cognitively. Does the child lose disability certificate if he learns by remedial education? Not usually. So the diagnosis of SLD is a lifelong diagnosis. We do not have tools to say it is 10, 20, 30, 40% like we have in autism. And therefore, honestly, the child does not lose anything. Disability access changes with age or it remains the same? No, IQ will change. There are age norms for it, right? You will do the adult scales for IQ assessment. So of course, those norms change. But again, dyslexia doesn't disappear. It can improve with time. Remedial education is a long process and many ordinary parents can't afford it or nor available for common people. Yes, so we have started, the center that you saw is run by some amount of donations and some amount of payment by the parents. So the affording parents pay a certain percentage and the non-affording parents pay 0. And that's the model that we have been following, which is the public partnership model. In Kerala, the Disability Commissioner passed the rule that anyone with SLD becomes automatically eligible for benchmark. Sebin, actually, that was passed in Maharashtra. We had given a rule right in the beginning saying that it is to be mandated. It is 40% because we don't have any other way to do it. And that was adopted by the whole country.
We give it a.
Thank you very much, sir.
Dr. Alka, you're not tired? I wasn't worried about you.
I know it's
Yeah, I
time
think-
for us to go na. Vishal is saying, "Abhi bas karo, bahut ho gaya." All right.
It's not like that, but look.
No, I'm just joking.
Because it is interesting because there's so much of people don't know, and so it's good. So much of interest.
Yes. Yeah, last question we'll answer.
Yeah.
Does a child of 6 to 7 at risk for SLD benefit by remediation? 100%. If you feel a child is at risk, then please start them on remediation, even if they are younger, and then do formal assessment at 8 years, providing the trajectory of the learning goes in whatever way. All right.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Actually, ma'am, I didn't disturb you because you were on a roll. So I thought let it flow.
I was going a little fast. Okay.
Yeah. Ma'am, it was really wonderful. But still regarding management aspect, I think we have learned to identify, we have some insights into management, but management is one thing that we need to bother you again, I think, if you have time for us.
Sure. We'll do it some other time. Do it some other time.
So thank you so much. It was a really wonderful session. I think we go to the chairpersons. Then Tufan sir will conclude the session. Chairpersons, please.
Thank you, sir. So the way Madam has presented and also very passionately gone through all the questions in the chat messages and answered each one of them without missing any question. In fact, along with the lecture, all the relevant questions that were answered by ma'am gave a lot of practical insights to all of us. And in fact, I also do agree that there should be a part 2 of this particular session to cover some of the challenging aspects in the management. And definitely as a participant, I would log in and I will
We'll ask
definitely
you to do that
learn from
job.
that.
Now you should do
No,
the
no.
sparking.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Over to Dr. Sharmishta ma'am for remarks.
Thank you, Alka. I learned a lot from yourself and Dr. John, of course. Thank you to Thursday Musings. Without any delay, I over to Dr. Tupanpati. So,
Thank
Certainly.
you. Thank you.
Dr. Alka, before sir completes, 250 people joined, more than 250. So just want to
Thank
inform
you. That is the power of Thursday Musings.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alka, for the nice presentation. Excellent.
Thank you, sir.
And the best part of is that it is a complex sphere. It will continue to be a complex sphere. But for this 1 hour, you made it very simple.
Thank you, sir.
When you go back and try to refresh your memory, it will still continue to be complex. You are requested to come again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
But what I have perceived in my practice, because actually we avoid these cases in a good number because it takes away the time from other assignments. It's a fact, honestly admit. When there is it are the parents. Parents of children below 6 years or 7 years when they start going to kindergarten. And there are some late learners, not slow learners. And the parents of them, when they find their children is difficulty in learning the letter names or the phonemes associated with the letters, they bother. They are learning properly, उसका learning नहीं है, कुछ है क्या dyslexia, कुछ है learning leader, आप कुछ कीजिए. Should we directly interfere in that? Because not that they're late learners, may not be, most likely, they may not be dyslexic.
Sir, anything which is where there is scholastic backwardness, we first assess and we see if they actually need to go in for any sort of correction or intervention. And like asked earlier, even the younger kids, we do remediation for a short period of time, or we do some sort of study skills and techniques to see that what is the trajectory moving towards. So if we feel that at that point in time itself, there are errors which can be corrected, we put them up for formal remedial education. So I have this young girl who came to us when she was around, why I'm remembering is because she just recently came. She came to us at around 5 years of age, suspected ADHD. We put her in for occupational therapy. But as she grew older and formal learning started, there are errors which the parents have noticed. The school has not complained of anything. So we told them that go in for remedial education, and the remedial teacher also suggested that speak to the school authorities, since it's a school which has a resource room, and you start the remediation process any which ways, because she's not old enough to undergo formal testing. And that has started. Now, this is unfortunately available only in select schools which have the special educators and the facility. So what we really need to do possibly as an organization is to work towards at least having one psychologist, and if you can't get a special educator, at least train 1 or 2 nodal teachers in the school with techniques of remediation, so that there is a resource room for these children, even at a government school level or a municipal school level. That is really a dream for all of us who work in the field.
That's correct. Okay, thank you. Amrit is there?
No, sir, he's not there.
Okay. I don't find him. So it is again my privilege to propose a formal vote of thanks. First of all, Alka, excellent again. Thanks very much. And you are again requested to be here.
Thank you,
And Dr. Professor Vijay Sagar, you provided the platform, completed the platform on this topic. Your rich inputs are also very much useful. And Dr. Sarmishta Chakravarti, thank you very much for being here.
Yes, sir.
And our vibrant moderators, all the participants, 250 to 300 participants today, as well as Talent Pharmaceutical. Thank you very much. We'll be here like this together for all the times to come. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you,
so
sir.
much,
Good night.
everyone.
Thank
Thank you.
you,
Ending the
everyone.
meeting now.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.